Dr. Wiggins, we know your passion for this topic, and it's an incredibly important topic. What was the impetus? You spoke a little bit about this before, but what was the impetus that led you into this level of investigation?
Well, marijuana is very personal to me. I have 3 close relatives who died young, and I have no doubt that they would be here today if not for marijuana. They were very heavy marijuana users, and one died just a few years ago of a sudden heart attack after many years of smoking marijuana. Also, a very close family member of mine, a young man who was a Christian young man. He got in with a group of guys who were smoking marijuana, and he thought, hey, everybody's doing it. Everybody seems to be okay. So why not? And he started smoking it. And after only 2 times, his second time, he developed really severe cannabis-induced psychosis, wound up in a psychiatric hospital, and he was never able to return to school. And that's the personal side. Then there's the professional side. I see a pattern of anxiety in my patients who smoke marijuana. Almost all of them who check the box that says that they smoke marijuana also check the box that says they have significant anxiety. Also, it takes about 3 times more propofol to keep these patients sedated than those who don't use marijuana. And it takes about 60% more pain medication after surgery to keep them comfortable. And so seeing the effects in my patients, my family, my friends, I began investigating the subject, and what I found just absolutely shocked me. I was just blown away by the amount of medical literature that was out there about this subject. And it doesn't go along with what you hear from Snoop Dogg and all the celebrities that are out there and much of the media. It really is very different than what you hear out there.
You know, reading the book, the thing that struck me the most was the level to which, and it was meticulous. You went through these studies, you brought them together, and I've said this a couple of times today. I can't emphasize it enough. I don't think anybody's done the level of analysis that you have on the available data. It is shocking that the data is available and that nobody seems to be looking at it except you are now, and some other researchers are, but you've really brought this together. When you think about the personal, as you detailed, and then the professional, what most concerns you about this hyper-normalization of marijuana?
Well, when weed is normalized, that means that more people are going to use it. Studies show that if you don't believe that it's a big deal, that you're somewhere between 6 to 22 times more likely to use than those who believe that it's going to cause issues. And so we're going to see a lot more physical health issues, mental health issues, spiritual issues. And it not only affects those who use it, but it affects the family members who are grieving over all of the problems that their family members are having, maybe over the death. And it even affects people that the user has never met, because there's close to 10,000 car accidents, fatal car accidents per year due to marijuana. So with normalization, we're going to see a lot more devastating and deadly effects.
Yeah, you hear this argument often. It's like, well, I would rather be with, a person who's happy and calm, high, than I would be a person who's drunk, and you hear, and again, it's this diminishing of what's actually going on. And so when I think about that, I come back to the physical. You were giving those numbers of how much more pain medication it takes for your patients, how much more. I mean, that's alarming on about 50 different levels. But when it comes to the physical impact of marijuana, as you were investigating, you were going down, looking at that, what were the things that shocked you the most in those findings?
Well, I found so many things that really shocked me, but probably the 2 things that shocked me the most were the heart effects and the epigenetic effects. And we were talking about this a while ago.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. I had no idea that marijuana would cause the heart effects that it does. For an hour after smoking marijuana, you have a 5 times risk of a heart attack. I have a story in my book of a young man who started smoking marijuana because he had Crohn's disease, and he thought, hey, this is going to be the thing that's going to help me. He started reading about it. He was a brilliant young man. He started reading about it. He got into a lot of a lot of books that talked about the use of marijuana in Crohn's disease. And so he talked to his parents about it. His parents were not on board at first, and then they're like, okay, well, let's just try it, because he had severe disease, Crohn's disease. Well, what they didn't know is that it was really harming his heart. And after just a few months, he began developing a severe heart arrhythmia, and he felt it a few times, but he didn't know what it was. And then he just died suddenly. Imagine the guilt that his parents had, because they felt like they literally killed their son. That's how they felt. No, they didn't kill their son, but that's how they felt, because they were on board with him using marijuana to help with his Crohn's disease. So there's severe heart effects, and I go into that in great detail in the book. The other thing that really fascinated me is something called epigenetics, and that's a sub-study in genetics. And if you look at genetics, our genetic makeup is very stable throughout life. But the epigenetics, that's all of the things that control our genes. And so it's proteins, there's many things that control our genes. That changes a lot throughout life. And this is a really hot topic now with neurologists. What they found is that the epigenetic makeup changes significantly with marijuana, very significantly. And it not only affects those who use, but it affects their children, their children's children, all the way down to the 4th generation. What do you remember from the book of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? The sins of the fathers will be upon the sons to the 3rd and the 4th generation. So it's amazing how the Bible meshes with science when you really look at it.
It's another example of the Bible being proven true,
Right.
which we know it is, but being proven true through science, which is what you expect to happen when you do science the right way and you look at things the right way. One of the things when it comes to the medical field in science and this topic that has been very interesting are the claims that marijuana in some way treats mental health, right? That people who are struggling with mental health issues, that marijuana is the thing that they need to take in some form to help them cope. What did you find once you started digging into that?
Yeah, science is definitely against that. If you look at the American Psychiatric Association, they tell you that there is absolutely no data that shows that marijuana should be used for any psychiatric or mental health issue. In fact, science leads us absolutely in the opposite direction. Marijuana will increase anxiety, it increases depression, it increases bipolar disorder, it increases psychosis, and you can just go on and on. Again, I told you about the young man who's a close family member of mine who had cannabis-induced psychosis. That's acute. That's something that happens very quickly, but also it leads to long-term schizophrenia as well. So there are so many reasons that you should never use marijuana for a mental health issue.
Yeah, and the concentrations of THC, right, have gone up so much since the 1960s and 70s.
Correct.
Okay, so with all of this data, and we have to come back to this because it's the big question that I think people will want to know. You have all this data showing the dangers. You document this in the book. We know it's there. People can try to ignore it, but the science is saying one thing, culture is saying another. Why has it been, in light of all this science, been fast-tracked and normalized the way that it's been?
Well, there's a physical side and there's a spiritual side. Americans have been led to believe that marijuana is no big deal. And as you said, somewhere between 60 to 70% of Americans believe that it should be legal. The latest study that you quoted is 70%. If you go back to 1991, only 20% of young people believed that marijuana was not harmful. If you look at today, it's just the reverse. It's 80% of young people believe that it's not going to cause significant issues. And as I told you before, there's a 6 to 22 times more likelihood that they're going to use marijuana if they don't believe there's an issue. Dr. Kevin Sabet, who has worked for 3 presidential administrations, both Republican and Democrat, says that big marijuana has bankrolled many legislative campaigns and media campaigns, and he believes that that's the big issue, that's the reason that behind the scenes that we're seeing all of this. We're seeing it in culture because they're bankrolling all of this. And so it's a profit motive there. Also, it's really not easy to swim against the current. When I start talking with my friends about this, especially before I was studying this, a lot of people thought that this was almost humorous, that I would think that there was something wrong with marijuana. And when you have so many people headed the other direction and you're trying to swim upstream, it's really not evil. Not easy, excuse me. It is evil. But I believe there's also a spiritual component to this as well. And we're not wrestling against flesh and blood. We're wrestling against principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness and spiritual wickedness in high places. And without that spiritual component, I don't believe that there would be such a dramatic shift in such a short period of time.
Yeah, in a culture where you're trying to confuse people, right? While we're talking about Ephesians 6 essentially here, what does the enemy try to do? To steal, kill, destroy, and confuse. And, that's what we're watching. Marijuana is part of that. One of the things that critics will often bring up with marijuana is alcohol. I can't tell you how many, I'm sure you've obviously heard this too.
Yes.
People will say, oh, okay, marijuana is far less harmful to people in society than alcohol is, so marijuana should be accepted. Now, obviously, we know you're going to have a different view. What would you say to those people if they were before you right now making that argument?
Yeah, while I absolutely agree that marijuana is extremely dangerous, marijuana is actually, alcohol is extremely dangerous. Marijuana is much more dangerous than alcohol is. And if you look at the percentage of people that are addicted to alcohol, it's about 10%. If you look at the number of people or the percentage of people that are addicted to marijuana, it's 30%. And if you look at young people up to age 30, that's 46%. So almost 1/3 of people who use marijuana are addicted. Almost half of young people who use marijuana are addicted. And yes, alcohol can kill brain cells. It can cause liver cirrhosis. It's addictive. There's so many more things that marijuana does, a greater magnitude. The damage to the brain, the heart, the lungs, the immune system, fertility. I mean, you can just go on, and the risk of the mental health effects that we saw as well, or talked about as well. The two are not the same.
Yeah, they're not the same. I mean, you can look when you use marijuana, you're using marijuana to get high. When you drink alcohol, you can have a glass of wine without being drunk. There is a difference in how these drugs are consumed, essentially.
Correct.
But let's come back to the addictive piece, because why is it? One of the biggest arguments is, well, it's not addictive. It's not addictive. Marijuana, there's no addictive properties. Can you talk a little bit about why it is addictive and what maybe has changed?
Yeah, if you go back to Woodstock, 1969, marijuana was 1% to 2% THC. The really good stuff was 3%. Fast forward to 1995, and you're looking at 4% to 6%. And today, it's 22% to 23%. Once you get above about 10% THC, and the THC percent is the potency of marijuana. Once you get above that 10%, it's considered high potency marijuana. And high potency marijuana carries a 4 times risk of addiction compared to low potency marijuana. And that's the biggest difference that we see today. So anyone that says it's not addictive, they're probably looking at studies from 20 years ago. Either that or they're just in complete denial about the science.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is people will say, and we see this in the church too, and this is important for Christians to understand, because it's so pervasive in culture. When 70% of the population is saying it should be legal, this is going to cross over into Christians and some people in the church as well. They'll say, well, marijuana is not mentioned in the Bible. You can drink alcohol, so why can't, you have a little bit of marijuana? I mean, this is an argument that is out there. How do you respond to the biblical side of that?
Well, alcohol and marijuana definitely are not the same when it comes to the biblical view. While alcohol can cause many problems, and there are warnings against its use in the Bible, many warnings against the use of alcohol, it's not completely prohibited by the Bible. I don't drink alcohol, but it's not prohibited completely by the Bible. If you look at marijuana, though, the difference is you can drink a little bit of alcohol and not get drunk. You can't smoke marijuana at all and not be high. And one thing that we need to talk about is the words high and drunk. That's not a distinction that's in the Bible. Any type of inebriation, anything that makes you not be in your normal mind, is considered drunkenness in the Bible. And so all drunkenness is prohibited by the Bible. In fact, the Bible says that drunkenness and drunkards can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And so you can drink alcohol, as I said, and not be drunk. But with marijuana, there's no way that you can do that. Also, our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. For all the medical reasons that I've talked about, we really should not be using marijuana because it's so much more powerful and causes so many more problems than alcohol does. And God doesn't want us to be a slave to sin. 30% of people that use marijuana are slaves to marijuana. So many reasons that we really shouldn't be using marijuana.
Yeah, and the alcohol argument starts to slip a little bit too when you start seeing that more people are smoking daily than are drinking daily now, right? So you're having this inversion. It's becoming a bigger issue that needs to be addressed. We talked about the biggest things that surprised you when you started digging into the physical aspects of this, but when it came to the stories, what maybe one or two stories, the personal impact on people's lives really moved you or got to you the most?
Well, since I've been doing this, I get messages, phone calls, texts from people all the time. Especially right now with the book coming out, I get these calls from people saying, hey, my family member's using, what can I do? And they tell me these just absolutely horrific stories sometimes. But there's one that really sticks out, and it's in the book. There's a gentleman, he's a PhD. He reached out to me through my website, and I wound up calling him because it was such a heartbreaking story. His wife started using marijuana because of anxiety. And as soon as their state legalized marijuana, she got her medical marijuana card. And every time she would smoke marijuana, she became psychotic. And she threatened him. She tried to kill him. She tried to kill herself. She assaulted police officers. I mean, the list just goes on. And she wound up going into psychiatric hospitals and to prison or jail 13 times. And every time she would go, she would get clean, she would get better, she would come home, she would apologize to him many times. But then as soon as she would get home, she would start using again, thinking that was going to help her anxiety. And then it was just a cycle of just heartbreaking dimensions.
It really does break your heart, especially when people are denying that it's happening, right? I mean, that's the part that's and it's such a fixable issue. It's something that we could tackle and really help people. And it's something that, you're doing with this book. At the end of the day, when the book and the study guide, if somebody picks them up, they read them, which we want everybody to do here. What do you want people thinking and feeling? What do you want to accomplish through these books?
Well, I definitely want to educate people. Again, I mentioned this several times in the book, and I've mentioned it here, but you are much less likely to use if you understand the risk of marijuana. And so if we can get people to understand the risk, then they're much less likely to use, and we're not going to see as many of the physical and mental health and spiritual issues that we see if they were using. And ultimately, what I really hope to accomplish with these books is I really want to lead people to Jesus. And I hope that I get to heaven one day and a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, I read your book. I gave my life to Jesus, and that's why I'm here.
I love that. Well, Dr. Wiggins, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.